live at the last session of Intercontinental CISO Forum as we talk about Africa and some of the great things that are happening in Africa. We've had some amazing sessions. The last session here is entitled Managing Risk in the Continuous Expanding Attack Surface. We're joined by Vikas and Neil. Thank you, Vikas and Neil, for joining us. Just doing a quick little round table for an introduction. Vikas, can you tell us a little bit about what you do within your organization?
Thank you, Mehdi. My name is Vikas. I'm the partner in charge in PwC Mauritius practice. I look after the cybersecurity and privacy practice for Africa region. As part of it, I think we just help the organizations to secure their environment from preparedness to really coming with incident response. And as part of the central teams, we work quite closely with the EMEA clusters.
Very cool. And Neil?
Hi, yes. My name is Neil Cosser. I'm the country manager for Talus, data protection business unit inside the organization. We assist companies in securing their data through processes of authentication and encryption.
Neil, I got a question for you. The world has changed.
Yes.
A lot has happened. You know, can you identify some of the expanding attacks that are occurring nowadays?
So what we are seeing in the marketplace is as organizations change, as organizations evolve, and COVID has been an accelerator of that evolution, there is this decentralization of everything. Users aren't coming into the office. Data centers are no longer in the corporate environment. They're in the cloud. They might not even be on the same continent as your organization. So this expansion of the environment has resulted in a massive expansion of where the data resides. And this is creating a very big attack platform for attackers to get into your organization, to compromise your infrastructure, and to get to your data or your knowledge, your value proposition in a way that will compromise you as an organization. So the expansion is where we're seeing this growth, this larger attack surface really showing itself.
And Vikas, for yourself, with regards to the attack surface, what are you seeing with your organization?
So, Mary, I think I resonate to what Neil just mentioned. So what we are seeing that this remote working environment had really increased the cyber threat surface for the organization. So if you see this, what we are seeing more and often that the cyber criminals are really taking advantage of this, using the different attack vectors to really compromise the organization endpoints, the network, the infrastructures. And more often we are seeing that human-operated cyber attacks are becoming more and more common today's. Ransomwares are really being targeted, impersonations, business email compromise is some of the soft target. One or more cases that when we used to defend our organizations, it used to be fixed in the four boundaries, and what we're seeing with the scalability of workforce working from anywhere. So the employees have become a new parameter to defend. So they need to just make sure the endpoints are really protected, and they become the soft target for in a matter of way to really bring the whole environment to compromise.
Well, I mean, 78% of breaches occur outside of the firewall. From a managing of risk, can you tell me a little bit on how your organization is effectively ensuring that that's being done? Neil?
So what we look to do is we look to protect that vital asset, the data asset. So whether it's behind the firewall or not, from our perspective, is immaterial. We looked, what is the data element and how can we best protect that data element regardless of where it happens to be? That's the value that we bring.
Very cool. And I know we're joined by Sherifat. How are you, Sherry?
I'm very well, thank you.
Better late than ever, right?
Better late than never. I apologize.
We just wanted to, we were just doing a quick roundtable and we started to get into the conversation. But if you could take a few seconds and just tell us a little bit about what you do and a little bit about you.
Sure, thank you. My name is Sherifat Akinwonmi, and I'm a cybersecurity specialist with UFA, United Farmers of Alberta. basically making sure that cybersecurity governance and control are in place. I've been in cybersecurity for almost 10 years. I started off in the banking industry and in Nigeria, then worked with InterSwitch, in the middle of banking industry is a company that supports financial services. And then I moved on to health services, which is GSK. GSK is a pharmaceutical company. Then right after that, my latest is with United Farmers of Alberta as a cybersecurity specialist. Cybersecurity is my passion, is what I love to do. I find every day very exciting. So yeah, I am. Thank you for having me.
Very cool, very cool. So I'm gonna I'm gonna ask you what I've asked these fine gentlemen is what are you seeing with respect to the expanding attack surface from you had pre-COVID, and then once COVID has changed the world, and we're sort of settling in to the unknown. What are you seeing in terms of changes in the attack surface that occurs now?
Yes, so thank you. So pre-COVID, there was a trend of, where there were a lot of increased attack surfaces, especially due to IoTs. There are a lot of devices that were being internet enabled, basically to make our lives easier. But at the same time, the attack surfaces are increasing, the level of vulnerabilities. Imagine where you have to wear a band, a watch that is an IoT that has access to the internet and has access to your personal data, where you are able to even I was looking at a documentary and eyeglasses which had access to the internet where you could automatically spool in your shopping list. So the attack surface continues to grow. And now with COVID, that only made us more vulnerable. More people now working online. Ordinarily, people who wouldn't be working online 100% of the time had to work online. So 100% of the time they are online, which means that in the beginning at March, we had, I think the number of phishing attacks even doubled worldwide. I know for Canada specifically, in Q1, 66% of phishing attacks were actually targeted at Canada. In Q2, it was about 59%. So imagine out of the whole world, we had 66% targeting at Canada, maybe due to, certain reasons such as Canada is predominantly English speaking as well as French, but so it makes this attack mechanism quite easier for the hackers. But because COVID is online, the attackers have actually also taken that as an opportunity and trying to get more people, get more victims. They know a lot of people, they also used a lot of COVID related attacks. So they know people were anxious about trying to learn about COVID, trying to learn about what the situation is, and then playing on people's intelligence using different techniques. They were able to lure people because of the situation of the pandemic. So invariably, COVID has brought more opportunities for the attackers, which is more vulnerabilities for us on the security side.
Interesting. Now, Vikas, working for PwC, you're dealing with organizations from all sizes with different needs and different wants, and I'm sure you're on the phone or on these Zoom calls talking to them. What are some of the advices you're giving them with respect to managing risk?
No, I think it's a fair question, Maddie. I think if I look at in terms of the pre-March and what we are seeing right now, organizations are really seeking assistance in terms of what is the best strategy to move on. A lot of strategy which was pre-COVID has to be relooked, and the leadership is also taking a big call around where they need to put the investment in and what they need to secure. So the discussions are happening around different layers. So what we are typically just telling them, make your foundation more stronger. That's the first fundamental things to look into. So what we are talking out here, when the organization has moved their parameters to move more on the remote working environment, they need to make sure they have a right set of practices. They have a right set of principles around how are they going to secure their shadow ITs which are running, and how far they make sure that the people and the end users, which is a soft target, they are using some approved solutions. That's the first way of looking at it. So really hygiene around the basic things that are become soft target to make the organization vulnerable. Secondly, around we also be guiding around drafting of some working from home guidelines to them, because that's one of the very key aspects of what you can and what you cannot. And ensure those remote applications which people are using it in terms of whether they are patched rightly, they are secured rightly. Make sure that the security that you have within the parameters are extended to the outside network itself. Making sure that you have mechanism in place to really monitor your remote access, especially in the case of those users who are connecting to the Active Directories, and just try to monitor the anomalous logins around this. So that's the first layer of really building the solid foundation around it. What next is very important is gone are those days where we say DR is going to be really looking for some critical services. Now people say that every application is critical for me to access from outside the network. So what are the basic fundamentals around really identify what is really critical for you to really be in access from outside, and ensuring those safeguards are well in place when anybody is accessing from outside. Especially what we have seen, one of the major things that I have seen, identity theft is becoming a very of the key aspect where people are impersonating business email compromise are happening, doing some financial transaction on the behalf of the organizations. Those have become a very common touch points. So what we are saying out there, how do you make sure your privileged users have a proper management around it, and you are really monitoring some high risk activities that are going and flowing through your network? That's the next level. And last but not the least, is very important is to really look at what are those opportunities, threats which are there, which are trying to take an advantage of the situations where you are today. So not the maturity of each organization, like you rightly said, I deal with the financial institutions, to the hospitality clients, to retail, and each of them have their different maturity around it. So how do you make sure that each one of them are taking the right course of action to really make sure the environment is secured? They have some early mechanisms around proactive monitoring the environment, and some sort of incident response capabilities to really not to look and bleed and just try to find out what happened wrong, but more proactive way of risk detections.
Interesting. Anyone agree or disagree or have any thoughts on that?
So yeah, I'd like to add a couple of comments to
Please.
that, largely in support. The first thing is the analysis of risk. We spend a lot of our time solving problems without understanding necessarily what the risk is that we're actually exposed to. And regularly, companies invest time, money, and effort solving a problem that seems to be a risk, but actually has very little real risk to the organization. So understanding the risk is vitally important. The next thing that I would advise is definitely going back old school and going with a defense in depth strategy, using technologies that overlap each other. They don't do the same thing, but they protect the same threat from a different perspective, to ensure that if an environment is compromised or a solution is compromised, you have a safety net to mitigate the risk of that compromise. And then the third thing that I'd like to add at this point is silver bullets. I'm a vendor, I sell my technology, and as any good sales guy, I'm going to sell my technology as the silver bullet that will solve your problem. The problem with a silver bullet is it only kills werewolves. You need garlic for vampires and holy water for vampires, and you need a stake in the heart for zombies, and you need different technologies. You need different silver bullets for the different threats that you're facing. So remember that as good advice as you get from a vendor, you need to, as an individual organization, have a clear understanding of your risk and your risk mitigation requirements. Take all the input you can get, use the technology that's available, but understand that at the end of the day, you need to be solving this problem. You can't point the finger at the vendor and say, oh, your product didn't work. It wasn't set up properly. It wasn't covering the risk that you were exposed to 9 times out of 10. So just a couple of thoughts to add on to that conversation.
No, that's very, I like your analogy about the vampire. Sherifat, what is your garlic? I mean, what is your organization doing to draw them in?
So absolutely, I agree with Neil said. Your whatever security strategy you have has to directly work towards reducing your risks or minimizing the impact of your risks, basically. And that is what we do, as an organization. Risk management is extremely important. We need to understand the business, and to do a proper risk management, you have to understand the business. I mean, security has gone beyond you trying to protect way more than what the business needs, because at times security is costly, it's not cheap. So what is the value of protecting something that is not valuable to the business? And you can only understand what is valuable to the business if you do a proper classification of your assets. And if you do your proper classification of your asset, both information, your proprietary, whatever you consider key to your organization, that is when you can do a proper risk assessment. And then the result of your risk assessment forms whatever you call your whatever you will implement as your mitigating controls. So whatever you have classified as your risk, whichever is of highest priority, definitely you have to work towards putting the applicable security controls towards it to make sure they are mitigated. So that is the way we do it, and that is the best way. Yes, nobody can reduce your risk to zero level, but just making it more difficult. Defense in depth, gradually, rather than spending a lot of time and efforts protecting something that is probably not of much value, you focus on what is key, and that way you can be sure you're doing right. Yeah.
Vikas, what do you think? What's your
Yeah,
thought?
I fully agree with that. Risk management is something which looked like more of a governance things, but I think like Neil and Sharif just mentioned, I think this is the fundamental to understand what are your crown jewels, where you really want to focus your energy around, what you need to protect. Because investing left, right, and center is not going to be the solution to the problem that you're trying to address. But understanding where the data resides, what are your critical assets, where you're going to bleed the most, and that's where the continuity of services in taking into consideration the information protection that you would like to have it, protecting your brands, protecting in terms of the financial payback that you have in case of any fines. All those things need to be taken a part of it as while building up your risk framework. And I think that's where the starting point should be, really looking at where we need to put the right investment to protect ourselves.
Got it. And with limited travel now, everyone's at home. You can figure out where your senior figures are within the corporation. How, and I would love to open this up, just sort of a round table here, and I'd love to ask all of you, how are you ensuring your mission critical staff are protecting their core environments? Like, have you changed some of your training and awareness programs? I'll start off with Neil, please.
Thanks, Marty. Well, interestingly enough, my team in Africa have been remote since way before COVID. I've been a remote worker with Talus for 8 years. I've never been office bound. As an organization, though, there have been a couple of things that we've tried to introduce, and that we had introduced prior. A golden image for all laptops. No administrator rights for anybody who doesn't need admin rights on their laptop. If I need to install something, it's a pain, believe me, but I've got to phone the help desk and get a privileged access account allocated to me for a couple of hours while I install some software on my laptop. So reducing privileges on our infrastructure, just to make sure that human element, the stupid things the individual user does without thinking, or because they are negligent or lazy or whatever the case may be, don't have an impact on the organization. So providing that infrastructure, what COVID has done that has introduced quite a challenge is the requirement to do things differently. And pushing that boundary, the fact that I can't get on an aeroplane and go, oh, Sherifat's not in Lagos anymore, but I would have gone and visited her and had some suya with her in Lagos, and sat down and had a face-to-face conversation and whiteboarded an environment of a risk and discussed it in detail has become particularly challenging. So we're now adopting and embracing different technologies which are not in that corporate mold. And the corporation is trying to evolve, sometimes well and sometimes not so well, on delivering technology in a secure way that we can use it.
Interesting. Vikas, you've been agreeing with
Yeah,
Neil this whole time. Do you agree, or do you see some? Would you add some
yeah.
soup to this and garlic to this?
I think it's going a very nice discussion of the garlic and soup discussions around. So I hope I can make it out. But I think what I see like from the time of this COVID, and I think there's a lot of disruptions happening the way the business model was operating. So all of a sudden, the people has to come up with some mechanism around like how they're going to operate, where people are not going to come and work, and they need to just scale this environment to go outside their parameters. So what we have taken the approach, and I think we need to be very cautious about two level of awareness that are very important key aspect. One is from the bottom up approach and one is the top down approach. The bottom up approach is where the end users plays a very critical role in terms of there being awareness around what they do and don'ts of what they have to be careful and watchful about. So a lot of organizations where we helped out and where the clients have been asking our people are people are tired of writing the big policies. They don't want to go into the policies. So create some sort of a more lighter way of making an impactful messages to go out. Give some sort of a guidance notes around it, or how do they go about in terms of their common practice when they are accessing those platforms from their open wireless network from their home, or some of them are using the secure VPN channel. How do they go about? Be watchful around what has been asked to you. Be careful about what has been asked in terms of the time and urgency to approve some payments. So some of those things, what we're seeing in Africa context is a lot of times it happened the impersonations of the executive, especially the finance functions are being becoming the soft targets, where payment transactions have been requested and somebody given approval to transfer the funds. And recently we have seen some of the cases in the East Africa also. And now that's one side of things where you just have to continuously build that training curriculum as part of the employees to really do those awareness around what has changed the model today. Now coming to the top-down approach where executives, I sit in a lot of the audit committee in the boards, they also are a bit more cautious about what they know they have become a soft target because they are not accessing people face to face now. They are seeing somebody is asking some approval, they are asking some access to some business plan, and they have to share those information. Now they cannot call every time each one of them to find out whether you are asking this information. So I think where we try to just make the cyber security subject, which is a very bit technical for them, and knowing their age factors, so we need to make it a bit more in a more of a war games in terms of some of those simulations and using some of gamification techniques to tell them what's happening wrong and how they should be cautious about their decisions that they are making around. So we have run some of those escape room or the war room in terms of telling them their preparedness and their readiness around how they are going to counter and how they should be watchful around what's happening in the organization, though it's not in their direct control.
I want to switch gears here, and Sherry, yeah, being in Canada, you've been around cyber in Africa, and just for the viewers that are tuning in, it's 10:40 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on the North American side, and I know we're getting into the beautiful evening in Africa. What are some of the differences you've seen from a culture standpoint, from a company culture, from people, from awareness, when it comes to managing risk and how organizations are providing that information?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And so when I decided to move to Canada, it was part of what I wondered about what the difference would be in terms of culture, in terms of, my career, how would the cybersecurity culture be, how would the organization risk management be, and things like that. And then I'm fairly new on my job and just about 2 months. And surprisingly, it's like we are all we all have the same enemy. So basically, every organization wants to protect, their most important assets. They want to make sure that nobody, takes away their financials or their money, So basically, it's practically the same from a culture point of view. I see more focused from a top management point of view, and which was also the same practice in Nigeria on cybersecurity related. If I recall, a few years ago, maybe right after my master's degree, and it was, cybersecurity was still a buzzword around in Nigeria. Not few years ago, more than 10 years ago now. And if I look at the attention being given to cybersecurity then and now, cybersecurity is a board level discussion agenda now. And I've seen that even from Nigeria. During my role at GSK, a couple of times I've had to go to the board to present about business continuity plans in case we suffer the cyber attack, or what are the plans we had in place if we had some sort of cyber attack affecting us. Because, and the reason for this is very simple. Cybersecurity goes beyond, it even affects our individual lives. So people are seeing in different ways in which they are affected. And they're wondering, okay, what if this happens in the office? What will be the impact? I know few people from their personal lives, they've suffered one form of cyber attack or the other. I know a friend whose wife is a photographer, and then she had taken pictures at the wedding. A couple, they just got married and she was the photographer. She took the nice, lovely pictures. And unfortunately, she clicked on an attachment that she didn't know and she downloaded the payload and all the pictures gone. They were not ready to pay the ransom that was demanded.
Wow.
But this wasn't for the organization. It was her own personal work. She had lost money. She had to explain to the couple what she's going to do to reproduce the wedding, basically. So, people are seeing this in their personal lives. And as such, it's coming to the office, which is why user awareness is key. I say it in security. Security controls are very important. You make sure your controls are watertight, but at the same time, you make sure your user awareness is also very key. You implement your security controls in ways that you believe your users are not aware, and then you train your users like you have no security controls. Did you get me, Maddie?
Sorry about that. It's getting. I think I'm getting tired a little bit. No, I'm joking. I want to switch gears and move into insurance and have a conversation, Vikas, with you. How is
Sorry, Muddy. Sorry, can I interrupt you? Because I would like to add to something that Sherry was talking about
please,
there.
absolutely.
So a couple of years ago, there was an article written, and it was publicly bandied about globally, that there were 3 million vacancies in cybersecurity globally. If you took every cybersecurity professional in Africa, you could give them a job somewhere else in the world and still not fill those 3 million vacancies. The biggest challenge that we face in Africa is we don't have enough resources. And unfortunately, where we do have good resources, like I'm going to use Sherry as an example, she gets poached to go over to Canada or Dubai or the UK or the US, whatever the case may be. We lose a lot of resources out of Africa. And one of the biggest challenges that we face, the reason that our attack surface is so big in Africa, is we don't have the skilled resources to defend our patch anyway. And our users are even less knowledgeable than our cybersecurity resources. So we're really on the back foot here. I think education is a massive drive, but not just educating users on the elements of cybersecurity. We need to be educating cybersecurity professionals across this continent all day, every day.
So, Vikas, what do we do? What's the solution here? How do you keep talent in Africa, Vikas?
Neil, I just been laughing at it because if I look at it, It's a very funny story. My family is in Canada and I stay in Mauritius. And the funny part is like that I took a choice to stay out here because I believe, like, I totally resonate to where you're coming to. I think this country need more of talent, which really required to take those conversations. It's such a big country which require really an upskilling on a continuous basis. Migration certainly is one of the key choice. Canada has been one of the favorite destination where people move. A lot of my colleagues from across the Africa region has moved on. But I think I just took this challenge because it's a tough journey when we see in Africa where you need to really bring up that skills from the early age of the youngsters to introducing the subject from the college. And then now taking this conversation to the board and audit committees, which is another battle in itself because security is seen more of an IT challenge. So it's not been seen as enterprise risk. They are not seeing from a point of it's a business risk which can impact them financially or hit on their reputations, hit their market positions where they stand up over the so many years of their doing business. But I think the battle is still on, and I think that's where I took a choice to give you some encouragement around that. I am out here in Africa, and I strongly believe to encourage others also to really the country have fantastic opportunity to really serve our clients, and a lot of interesting piece of work are being done across the emerging technologies in Africa. If you look from a donor based agencies which are funding the drones technology to robotics to really looking for smart cities. So all these things need some sort of professionals who can really advise the client. How do you balance that risk and at the same time the innovation?
So Neil, are you saying
If I,
that
I
people?
wanted,
Yeah, go ahead, Sherifat.
yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I know that you had mentioned about educating, the security staff themselves and, the business focus from just beyond user awareness. But I know that they are fun. Maybe I shouldn't, I'm not the right person to say this because I've left Africa. But the thing is, I know of highly skilled, talented people in Africa which they're so interested in cybersecurity, they train themselves. I, for example, I all of most of my certifications I've had to do them on my own. I paid for them, not waiting for the organization to do, because I know what my objective is, and I know a lot of people in the same situation who are going out of their way. I know if someone who graduated in physics and trained herself in cybersecurity, but well, as it is, at some point you make those decisions to say, okay, what is next for me? Where can I see more challenges to add to it? But I really appreciate for staying back in Mauritius. That's quite brave, but more people are working towards getting that knowledge and building themselves, investing in themselves, and waiting for more opportunities to utilize their skills.
I think so, Sheriff. I think this is a very interesting point that you touch on. I think it's each one of us our responsibility. I moved back from India to Middle East, and I came to Africa, and then I have an opportunity to move to Canada. But I think one of the things that we really need to be taking our own responsibilities to really give that knowledge sharing and helping those youngsters who really have a passion. Because if I go back and look at some of those fantastic pen testers or professionals who are compromised, best hackers if you can get it in Nigeria. Are we all in?
One of the things we've been talking about is managing risk, and one of the important vital foundations of that is people. In Canada, for example, or in the US, I'll use this as an example, or I'll use some sports, right? If you want to play football, you go to Europe. If you want to play basketball, you go to the NBA and you go to the US. If you want to play hockey, you come to Canada. And these countries are excel in these specific sports and genres which drive people to come. And the number one reason why they come, other than health or possibly education or family, is money. So as we go through this, one of the things that you brought up, Vikas, is training them, providing them knowledge. But how do you figure out, I'm a student, I'm in Africa, I got an opportunity to go to Canada, I've seen it on TV or the US. the money's really good. Why should I stay in Africa? Vikas, Neil, why?
That's an interesting point. Neil, you want to go on?
Yeah, I was going to say that is exactly the problem. Why would you want to stay in Africa? There are a lot of Africans who are very passionate about being African and being in Africa, and that doesn't take away anything from anybody who hasn't stayed in Africa, who's had the opportunity. And I think if the opportunity presents itself to anybody, they would look very seriously at doing it. The why is the very difficult question to answer. The opportunities are not in Africa to really succeed. And when I go to Nigeria and I sit around a boardroom table talking to the IT security department of a bank, and I say, okay, who has been in IT security for more than 5 years? And you might get one hand out of 10. Most people have been in IT security for somewhere between 1 and 3 years. They are still very young. And what I do, I spend a lot of my time sharing, like on a forum like this, a lot more general IT security as opposed to specifically what my product or my technology does. And that knowledge sharing, it's what we do. But why would somebody choose to stay if they got the opportunity? I don't have an answer to that. I really don't have an answer to that.
Right, Neil. I just to add on to this one, I think you're spot in on. Like, I think it's a challenge because to really find the right talent, build up their career, and then retain them is one of the key challenge that we see in Africa. Because if you look at the investment that we make, I think there's a lot of programs that are run across Africa, from cyber academies to the introduction of the cyber as curriculum as part of the university program now. But where it comes to challenges, right? How do you make them sure that when there's a market potential that they see in the European or the Western part of the world, and what is there for them in Africa? What we do there most commonly, and that's an effort that we are trying to do continuously basis. Like, we need talent to really serve this market. Africa have a huge potential. If you look at in terms of the clients, they are from mining to really agriculture to anything that you call around. It's full of gold opportunities that we can see. So I think where we try to build up, when we just look at it, as if I look back into the PwC model, where we also struggle to get the right talent, we try to attract the people who coming up from the university to tell them we are trying to give you a career, and we start educating them in the cyber track from the early ages and giving them this cycle of opportunities across working different industries, learning from the clients, which is also one of the key aspects. We may be very good tech savvy guys or girl like who know the subject, but I think unless you understand what's the business landscape, that's where we try to bring up that difference to them. But at some point, yes, you're right on saying that it's difficult to retain, and they have the opportunity to look into what's next best for them.
Interesting. Neil, what is your organization doing to retain amazing talent from Africa?
Yeah, good question. What we're doing is we're recruiting. In our business unit, which is responsible for cybersecurity, we're very thin on the ground. My team is only 5 currently on the continent, but we're recruiting, and a lot of the recruitment is around people who see themselves in Africa in the next 5 years. Our organization has a mobility plan where, and I'm sure Vikas PwC does as well, where the internal opportunities are advertised so that you can move, and everybody looks to leave but not come to Africa. But we look to employ people who have a passion for Africa. It's one of my drives is to try and find people that have a passion for Africa. And my drive in my team is to educate, is to share knowledge beyond just what we do as a technology company, about sharing your life experience and your knowledge so that everybody benefits from it. But yeah, we're a small team, so we're not really in a situation where we're losing people yet. We're not big enough to be doing that.
So I'm going to have a uncomfortable conversation, but at the same time, I'm not looking for exact numbers here, Sherry. But given your experience, and I'm looking for a range. With your sort of position, if you were living in Africa, what would be the salary range to be a cybersecurity specialist in Africa, for example, for a pretty decent organization? What would be the range in salary?
Um, so it's it's quite a difficult question because the salary scale in Nigeria, and specifically, I don't know about African countries, usually depend on many factors. Sadly, one of the factors being that what was your previous take home, which is something I do not agree with. I do not like at all, but it's something that's very common for. You've done the interview, they found you very talented and skilled and very capable of performing on the job. But the only thing, and most of the time they have a role or a band for the salary for that role. But the only thing stopping you from getting what you're worth is the fact that you were earning lower in where you were coming from. So the moment you start off earning low, unfortunately, in Nigeria, until you get to very big multinationals, maybe the oil and gas, that do not really do that, then they pay you what the role meets. So it's a bit difficult to say an exact figure, but I know that I know most of this information is also very easily accessible online. We could check average range of salaries for an IT security professional or a CISO or an IT manager in Nigeria. What I know is generally low compared to the world. I mean, when I was at GSK, I worked in the cluster for the African cluster, and even within the African cluster, I was, one of the lowest paid. So,
Wow.
and not and even
And
my manager tells me
yeah.
that I was shocked when you accepted the offer. She told me, but I knew it was a good offer because for what I was coming from. But I got to understand when I wanted to recruit someone on my team, and I was telling HR, this is the amount this person is worth, and he told me, why should we give almost 150% increase? That is, the person is coming with a low. I said that shouldn't matter, but they said that is the policy. So, in terms of compensation, I think Nigeria-wise, I think people are highly talented and should be earning way more, and which is one of the fundamental factors why people will opt to leave when they know that they can have better life, better access to healthcare, better security, and many other things, and even earn more. So why would I stay? So,
It makes
at
sense.
times,
No,
except
it
for
makes
people who are
yeah. And
very,
we're
determined.
Yeah, and I know we're shifting a little bit from our conversation. However, Neil has created this garlic that we're just sort of mashing away at, and it's an interesting point in managing risk, and that is really people. Sherry, I'm going to take this right back to you one more time before I move on to Vikas. Being a woman in Africa compared to being a woman in Canada from a cybersecurity standpoint, what are some notable advantages and disadvantages from both continents?
Okay, so maybe I'm still very new to I haven't experienced anything relating to my gender, being, a woman, or my gender due to my gender. Um, but the truth is, as a woman in Nigeria or in Africa generally, there's just that notion that women are less technical. So they believe they're less technical. So on a project, they are assigned the more administrative part rather than the more technical bits, whereas they are capable of doing this. So basically, it is not the same here. I haven't experienced that yet. I attended the interview. I was on a panel with a couple of men. I'm not sure if I was the only lady, being interviewed, but I got the role. But I do understand that there were very good people, candidates on the interview as well. And for the role to have been given to me, I know that, yes, consideration was given that, yes, it's not based on gender, but because of my capability. I also know that there are a lot of talks in Canada about increasing the number of women in cybersecurity, in technical, roles as well. I'd spoken to a couple of people, some CTOs and CISOs here, when, trying to understand the landscape and how it is generally. And a couple of women are in really top positions in cybersecurity, CISOs and CTOs. So, yeah, I can't really say in terms of Canada directly because I haven't experienced anything. But in Nigeria, there's just that notion about people being less technical. At some point, I was the head of information security at
Wow.
InterSwitch. I was
Right.
a lady, and I was really celebrated at that role in Nigeria. And everybody just wanted to know how come you're a woman? How are you coping with family and
Yeah.
coping with
Yeah.
this?
Of
And
course.
I
And
was
and
able to pull that through. Yeah.
and Sherry, we've had you at our some of our other events in the past, and our last physical event was called Canadian Women in Cybersecurity, which was held in March, right before COVID changed the world. And one of the really cool things from a PwC standpoint in Canada, it was
Yep.
a major push from a Canadian
Yep.
standpoint. And the reason why I want to peel away at this garlic is we've identified one of the things, which is people, a part of managing risk, which Neil brought up. And trying to dig deeper, I wanted to figure out from a women's standpoint, because you have people, you have awareness training, why are they coming to Canada, et cetera, et cetera. And then if you break it down even further down to women in cyber, who I think have an extreme capability of understanding from a cyber standpoint. PwC in Africa, what is it doing in Africa with regards to women in cyber?
Oh,
Vikas.
certainly. This is, I think you're right to touch on. I think, and like it's a part of the global forum, those new reforms in terms of encouraging the women to move on the cybersecurity is something that's very much motivated within the forum itself. So if I look at, I form part of the cyber leadership within Africa, PwC all across the region, and one of the ladies, one of the key members in this group. So that's one of the salient example. And apart from that, if I look at in terms of my own team, it's a 50-50 ratio of the girls versus boys who are playing their hands-on-hand games around really delivering those services to the client. Certainly, we have a very much consideration for diversity and inclusions around really bringing up each one up the game. Uh, they are the multiple facet of cybersecurity. Is not only just about performing the technical reviews on just crunching on the nuts and bolts. I think it goes beyond that. I think there's a holistic approach of where people play their part. And I think we have a very fair considerations for really bringing up the girls and the boys together in the rooms and really giving them a chance to really have that discussions which they can really take on to the clients. So it's the same thing like Mary, you touch around what's happening in the PwC Canada. This is the same program that we have run out in Africa also. Mary, you there?
So the other thing, Neil, if you wanted to just expand on what your organization is doing with regards to women in cybersecurity in Africa.
So my team, my direct reports, it's 50-50. So we're an equal opportunity employer. We employ the best person for the job. But as I said, very small team currently, and we will continue on that endeavor of equal opportunity, employing the best person for the job.
Okay, sounds good. So we've sort of dug a little bit on the people that help managing risk, and I mean the solution is very difficult to find. It really comes down to building out a foundation in Africa that you can continuously grow, building out a culture, building out people with education. And I just wanted to move the conversation along and talk about cyber insurance. From an insurance standpoint, when Vikas, you're speaking to your organizations, how has that conversation changed from pre-COVID to now August, September, October, November, these sort of conversations with your clients regarding cyber insurance and how that deals with the managing the risk?
So I think that's a quite interesting subject in terms of if you look at the layered security, you try to build some sort of governance, you try to protect your environment, building up some security, and then you transfer your risk to the third parties. And that's where I thought that if I look at cyber insurance has always been on table, and but unfortunately it has never been so much enriching to understand what are the organization exposed to. Can you really quantify those risks? So what are we covering ourselves? The insurance policy is covering around, okay, is there any breach? We are going to be covered. But is the breach, the coverage that you have, the policy that you're taking up is good enough for you to pay back in terms of any fines or penalties? That has been always been a gray area. Post-COVID, what we have been just seeing that I think that with the attack surface has been going a bit more wider than what we anticipated. As a customer, they really want to protect their organizations to have a full coverage from the insurance service providers. But from an insurance response is also very important to understand what sort of risk that you're exposed to. So they typically go back, and what we are seeing in some of the organizations, they are reassessing their policies around cyber insurance. They are reassessing in terms of the coverage. So it starts from, do you really have a fair understanding of your risk? Do you really have a fair understanding of how are you taking care of those risks, and do you quantify those risks in terms of monetary loss if you can? And obviously very important aspect in terms of the governance, how do you build those level of some mitigating controls around it by policies, by having technical controls, and if things goes wrong, what sort of mechanism you have to really respond to any breach and recover from that incident? So that's a purely like spectrum around from end to end the insurance companies are looking at. And then based on that, they do the underwritings and their pricings primarily. So what are they asking the questions around? What sort of risk appetite they want to just also as insurance and then get reinsurance on that. They want to really go back so that if a claim come tomorrow from any organization who have been somehow breached and have been compromised, what sort of coverage they have. So now the new discussions are happening around, can we really assess in terms of what sort of risk you are in, what sort of capital that you need to pay back in terms of your policy coverage. We're also talking around like when insurance companies are coming to start doing some sort of scenario-based testing, which is a very important aspect, like what sort of readiness you have. It's not about like I've transferred my risk to the insurance company and I'm covered. I have nothing to worry because if something goes wrong, I'll be covered by the policy. I think they're also trying to understand as an insurance, they have specialized unit which works specifically to identify the exposure. So I've been talking to some of the insurance company who come to us to say, guys, can you really work with us to understand? Because the subject is very niche in terms of identifying where are the loopholes, where things can go wrong, and try to understand the exposure around it. And obviously, based on that, they also try to see the board and executive awareness around if things goes bad, what sort of crisis management response they have in place. Do they have an incident response framework in place? Do they have proper monitoring defense around it to really respond to any cyber attacks? So those things are very much primarily under discussion, Adi, and this is something really coming up back on the table post-COVID.
For a lot of organizations, it's very, as you can say, overwhelming when it comes to cyber insurance. Neil, what would be some of the priorities on cybersecurity risks that organizations should look at within their policies, especially today?
I'm not really qualified to answer that question because I'm not particularly versed with cyber insurance. What I have seen though is the customers in an endeavor to abdicate responsibility. So they'll buy technology from a third party, from a service provider, from a reseller or an integrator, and they will request that the integrator provide insurance. That should the product fail, should the product introduce risk to the organization, they want, I don't know, $10 million in penalties or whatever the punitive measure might be. But they're not prepared to pay for that insurance covering. They feel that should just be included because you believe in your product. And the challenge comes in that very rarely is the product that bad that is going to introduce risk. It's how it's implemented, it's how it's managed, it's how it's interfaced with. So the whole business around cyber insurance can be very badly misused in an organization, in an operational situation, when technology is being bought and sold, when technology is being implemented. So I don't have the insights into what people should be considering, because it's really outside of my sphere of influence. But I have been very aware of that question of cyber insurance being used as a big stick in a negotiating process when people are looking to buy tech.
So how are you dealing with the new threat intelligence information that's coming up daily? Neil.
Not sure I understand the question. Can you
Yeah,
give me
with limited access to SAF and communication, your communication playbooks, etc. How are you dealing with the new threat information that's coming up in terms of communication with your staff?
Oh, okay. So we have information overload. Really, we get so many updates on the new threats, the new attack vectors. We do use a lot of technology. So when it is a standard attack, a basic attack, we use a lot of technology to take the attack out of the user's environment totally. Sherry was talking about phishing attacks earlier. I haven't received a phishing email to my work email, and I have a number of work email addresses, or a spam email or anything in months, because we have really good technology to take that threat vector out. So we tend to educate on the vectors that we feel our technologies don't cover sufficiently well. And there's a lot, but with our business being around data security, it's very much an education of keeping your data secure, understanding who you're sharing it with, understanding why it's leaving the organization, or should it be leaving the organization. So there's a lot of education in that sphere.
Interesting. Vikas, from your organization?
So I think if I look at the communications, I think that's what I was just thinking when Neil was talking about. I think two way of looking at it. With a lot of informations going in and flow and outflow, and a lot of informations are going. If you see from Africa standpoint, also incidents are striking. So it's not like that things are not happening. But I think there's a two-way of looking at it. People don't want to share information if they get compromised. That's one of the things, because of the reputation risk. And second thing, I think information sharing doesn't happen that way good as it happens to the cyber criminal community. They share the information. If they find it something way of compromise of one of the emails services, it just broadcasts to the rest of the clients in the same region. So I think fundamentally what we have seen, the business email compromise has been very much common soft target over the last 7-8 months. We have seen that in terms of a lot of impersonations going around it. So I think the very basic things that we are telling people is around from end users is like that. Continuously communications, we're putting up some sort of a screen and savers to tell them what they should not. Running some phishing simulations is one of the key things that organizations are doing also regularly. And what they try to find out in that simulation is the very funny things that you will see the common set of people who don't care and they just like click on anything what they come up. And at the senior executive, they just take up a call to say, we need to just make those people understand because they are making the whole organization vulnerable at some point. Do we just need to overload them in terms of, if I look at the ransomware, which has been striking from the last 1 year, almost like November to now, it has really gone 4 times to 5 times really, and it's becoming it's becoming more advanced now compared to what we see WannaCry and NotPetya, and things are going to be more hard in terms of how you're going to come back to. So I think the only part that we can play on is in terms of telling our people to be cautious, because independent of, like Neil mentioned, technology will play parts, what it can, but it cannot just take care of everything. Now, building some sort of a layer defense around threat intelligence, automations, automated response, service or SOAR, orchestration services, which become more intelligent, driven on artificial intelligence to really give up another level of comfort to the end users is something that we are seeing. So not relying only on the end users, but building some sort of intelligence in the whole ecosystems.
Interesting. Sherry, I wanted to take this to you with respect to your organization that you're working with. How are they managing the boom in IoT devices and the multiple endpoints through which the staff are connecting with or accessing applications from home?
Yeah, okay, thanks. So, luckily, I'll talk about these organizations as well as my former organization in Nigeria, GSK. Um, right, even before COVID, pre-COVID, our systems were designed in a way that you could work remotely because they had a great culture, and even here, so it wasn't when COVID started, and a lot of people had to start working from home. um, we didn't have to do a lot in terms of trying to set people. All we had to just make sure, because of the internet infrastructure in Nigeria is pretty bad, not as strong as what you have here. Sorry for the background noise. But the thing is, all we had to work on was just to make sure that people didn't lose their laptops. So we were fighting a different kind of battle, things like your laptop going bad due to power issues or things like that. So from a point of view of security, that was already built into the system. Users could work securely from home. We had a VPN, but specifically for IoT, IoT isn't very common in Nigeria as being used for work. But around here, security has been built in. MFA is quite key because once you can get the access control sorted, a lot of people, you've mitigated significant amount of, even if users accidentally leak out their credentials, if you have a strong MFA. And by the way, I learned that phone-based MFA isn't longer strong, so it has to be something else. But in a way, MFA was part of what we had as well to ensure that access control from all kind of devices was watertight. Yeah.
Interesting. We got,
Can I add to that, please, Madi?
please, Neil, please.
I want to really support what Sherry has said there. At the start of COVID, as an organization, we noticed that our multi-factor authentication, single sign-on technologies really hit the market hard. There was a massive demand for that as businesses were scaling up their remote workers. Now, remote workers are enabled to or can be securely authenticated through multi-factor authentication and that single sign-on process and access management, identity and access management, all those policies are in place. Now we're starting to see that businesses are turning and saying, now that we know the users are who they say they are and their credentials are not going to be compromised, how do we give them secure access to data, to infrastructure that we need to? And this is where we're starting to see that the security of the data is starting to become a lot more topical. People are saying, okay, I know that they are my people. How do I make sure that they can only access the correct data at the correct time? And if it's not the correct user or the correct time or the correct device, how do we control access? So I have seen a shift in my business going from multi-factor authentication technologies at the beginning of lockdown to a situation now where people are looking significantly more at the operational security as opposed to access control.
Interesting. You know, the new normal, I speak to CISOs all the time, and they've become more riskier with risk. Vikas, do you find yourself or the policies that you're seeing within organizations becoming more lenient with staff operating from home? I mean, Neil just touched on the dynamic and the change that has occurred, but are you seeing it on the ground with organizations changing their policies a bit, being a little bit more lenient, being a little bit more riskier with risk, Vikas?
I think, just to answer in a simple way, I think at the time of the crisis, it was like, we need to get the operation up and running. where people are not going to come anymore, and we need to give them access to it so that they can be connected to the organizations. But as the time evolving and it become a new norms where I think it's going to be like the remote working is going to be one of the new business model around it. So I think the organizations start thinking around how do they keep on building that layered defenses. So at least what Lil just mentioned, Sharif mentioned around building that layered defense means understanding our data first, understanding our infrastructures, understanding what applications are, understanding who have access to it. Do we have a mechanism to really give them access, and who will provide that visibility around it, around the clock to say, you know, when you go to the office, you used to have a working hours 8 to 10, and then some people will be accessing some applications. But now we are living in an environment, people are accessing information around the clock. So it has become something that you cannot have a continuous watch on that. So they're relying a lot in terms of enhancing that security controls within their own parameters, then scaling up in terms of some of those advanced monitoring mechanisms, and have built some sort of early detections and response capability is very key aspect around it. Because you can't do much with this loads of information going in and out for ingress and egress of this information flooding. One of the major challenges becomes, do I really understand my data? Do I really understand what I need to protect? And if I don't have that visibility around it, the best of the technology will be not be able to do what they have an expectations around it. So I think it's a continuous path where people are really looking at it. And my conversations with some of those clients are, it's great. We have just allowed some of those access to work remotely. Some of them have been talking about using the VDIs, using the application as a container, so people can just work remotely on one particular instance, like, and they can't just download any information they can't access. You need a VPN connections to just get into it, to start working up. So they're trying to do multiple way of tactics around how far we can secure that channel of communications, and obviously then access to those applications. But going forward, I think they are more talking about things are going to be like this. We need to build some sort of more advanced concept around proactive monitoring around some of those security flaws that we can see in the network. Some of those security flaws when people are trying to access the wrong informations which they are not supposed to do. So it's a continuous journey they are building on.
Sorry, Neil, I have a feeling you have something to say about this.
Well, I was going to continue that it's about, and I've touched on this a couple of times, about understanding what the risk is and why you putting those technology controls or procedural controls in place. Yes, we may have gone through a period where they were more risky about risk, but I think that was just a knee-jerk reaction to get operational as quickly as possible. The focus, I really believe, is back on mitigating risk, but the risk has changed, the vectors have changed, so it's reevaluating what is the risk and how do I mitigate that risk. The biggest concern for me is the fact that people don't necessarily understand what their risk is or what their critical assets necessarily are. They have an idea, but they don't consider the shadow IT. They don't consider how their environment has organically grown, and they miss an incredibly large amount. I have just a very quick a story that I quite regularly give in my presentations about a gentleman's magazine in the 90s that decided that they were going to revolutionize their business and they were going to go online. So they created high-end content, which they put onto a very secure server. They had very rigid access control. You had to be a subscribed member to be able to access the collateral that they were putting into their organization. And they built, at the time, one of the most advanced security protocols to secure their critical business asset, the images that they had created. Within 3 months of going live, they were attacked. And the attackers were not interested in a single picture of a scantily clad woman, because that actually doesn't have a lot of commercial value. They went for the customer database. They went and they took the customer database with credit card numbers and high profile individuals' identities and all the rest of that, because at the time, the organization didn't understand the value of that data. We're a lot more educated now. We understand the value of data a lot more, but I think oftentimes organizations either don't know what data they've got, or they don't understand the value of that data. They don't understand the risk. And that's where organizations like PwC is going to be making a significant change in the customer's interface, because they've got a much broader understanding of data and the value of all data and the risk of a data compromise. So my whole concern is not that people are riskier about risk, it's that they don't understand what is at risk in the first place.
Interesting. Vikas, what is at risk? I mean, I know it's going to take a full another session of probably 3 more days to understand the value of data for an organization. But if you were to summarize it for an organization and saying, in a 3-step or a 2-step or whatever you have that when you discuss with organizations to understand their value, what the data is, that the crown jewels, so they say, what's the most simplest way for our viewers that are watching, that are in that stage right now, trying to really understand what is the data that's important to their organization? What's a simple way to explain that, Vikas?
All right, I think though we can say it's simple, it's not as simple. I think
It never is.
So what we typically say, I think information protection. So information protection is something that we say you need to protect your information. So information can be anything related to, I think you touched it very nicely around my personal information. If I don't want to get it in the wrong hands. So that's something that we try to just make them understand. And if you connect to them in that way, they understand, because as part of they coming to the organization and accessing some corporate information, they don't realize if they share this information on some of those shared platforms, what it can really make noises around it. So I think it's very important for our business unit heads and talking to the organizations in different line of business they are in. Do they really understand what information they deal with, whether it's suppliers, whether they're creditors, whether they are dealing with some business plans? And let's understand the value of those things. So we always try to say the best way of looking at it, and like Neil just mentioned, and I think this is where our focus area is also, can we quantify if this information goes in the wrong hand, what it can cause damage? Now that's where people start understanding that, oh, this information is highly classified. This information is something very sensitive. I am dealing with in some information, so I need to be very watchful around who I have to share this information with. And that's a very conscious mind around something that you can look into. The subconscious mind is where you get enticed in terms of like where you don't know what's happening and somebody tried to just come up as let's say authenticated users or somebody who try to just compromise on your environment and try to access those information. Then it goes out of your bandwidth. So what we typically say, people can do what they can in terms of understanding what data is at risk and what value it can hold in terms of any cyber breach if it happens. The second part is basically like building some sort of layer defense. I think if you don't understand your data and you're trying to secure your data, I think you are just hunting wild. So I think you need to be very careful around not to just invest in technology straight over, because I've seen a lot of clients who are struggling around because they believe that data loss prevention is there. We bought a data loss prevention platform and we are done. But they also have the technology which will serve their purpose only to some sort of metadata tags that you define to say what you want to protect. But unless we have a time in spending to understand what information I deal with, I think that's a very key aspect for me. You can build around a lot of controls on applications, around the network, around your parameters, to your firewall, monitoring when for any sort of information going. But what is very important aspect is we as a custodian of that data or informations, do we really understand what we need to protect? And those are the key things that we start the conversation with. And when we start seeing cyber value at risk, which is basically we say, how much is really going to be quantified in terms of value and what you are at risk at if this information goes is something that we take on conversation, Maddie.
Interesting. Well, Sherry, I know we have about 9 minutes left, so just some closing statements for the panelists here. And the question, one of the questions I got here is, what are the items to consider when planning your organization's cybersecurity risk management? So, I mean, I know there's a ton of them, but just to hear from each of you, Sherry, starting from you, what would you say are the top 2 or 3 elements that or an organization should consider when planning cybersecurity risk management? You need it.
Yeah.
You have to have it. It's one of those things that are extremely important to you.
Yeah, so extremely important is you have to understand the business. You have to do a business impact analysis to know what areas of your business are very important. So I'll give a quick example and also relating to what Vikas said. So my role at InterSwitch, one of the head of sales came and told me that we have a problem. We just noticed that while we are still brainstorming a particular product we're about to launch, we're talking about the features, and in two months before our set go live date, our competitor launches the same, something very similar to that. And then I told them, yes, your data, so your business plan, all of the project plan have now become very critical. What sort of solution can we use, can we implement to limit someone from accidentally leaking or deliberately leaking this information? So to do a proper risk management within your organization, you have to do a business analysis, business impact analysis. You have to know which areas of your business and categorize it based on priorities. That this is key, priority, critical, then high, then whatever you choose to use as your categorization. That is key. Secondly, you have to have like an holistic view of all your risks. So more like a risk register. So in this area of the business, is my audio okay? I don't know.
Yep, you're fine.
Okay, all right. In this area of the business, they may consider certain aspect or certain of their processes very critical. And then to HR, so I'll talk about sales having their own list of business impacts processes that are quite important categorized. And then HR has theirs and other department. You need an holistic list or a register, risk register, something that will help you accumulate all of this into one so that you have an enterprise view of all of this business critical processes of these business processes. And then from an enterprise point of view, you're able to prioritize and know exactly, okay, this is more critical to this. You should be able to determine for your business, what is that one risk, if exploited, or one vulnerability which exploited can bring down the business. So you must have your risk impacts in terms of maybe categorization, depending on your appetite and how you can deal with that. You know that this particular incident, if it happens, this can bring down the organization. If this happens, it's of significant incident, but it can still manage it. And you have to have that. Just one same metric for the whole organization, and it should also tie to the naira and copper, like we say in Nigeria, or to dollar and cents. It has to be monetary, otherwise you wouldn't be able to see the value, and even the business will not take it as serious if they do not see that it is directly linked to the financials. So that being one, doing a proper business impact analysis, having a consolidated risk enterprise level is another one, and then the third one would be be consistent about your reviews. Your risk position now may not be that in the next 6 months. So it may be of this level at this particular time. In another 6 months, the business focus may have changed, or the environmental factors may have changed. And then that would totally shift the dynamics of where you should be focusing on. So doing your risk management process, having a framework and a plan for it, where it will be done regularly, is another thing that is quite key to make sure you're doing the organization. So those would be my three things. Thanks.
Interesting. And I'm going to ask this question to you, Neil. I mean, Sherry just brought up discovery, inventory and classification, risk scoring, and security ratings. Would you agree those are your top 3 must-haves as a foundation in terms of understanding understanding the components of risk?
No, I wouldn't necessarily, because what Sherry has described there is very correct in terms of a global view. What I'm finding in Africa, and have found in Africa for many years, is that a lot of the foundation of security is not there, and a lot of time, money, and effort is being invested in laying a foundation that is really or was designed to mitigate risks from 15 and 20 years ago. It would be quite interesting and novel if African organizations could take a step back and say, we're actually trying to solve modern threats. So let's look at more of the emerging technologies. And if we don't have the latest, greatest, fastest firewall, does it actually make that much of a difference to us as an organization? Or could we implement a leading edge cybersecurity technology that is not mainstream, but mitigates today's risks? So in an environment where there is no legacy technology and there's a very limited budget, I'm finding that African organizations tend to spend money on legacy technology to solve legacy problems. It would be novel and it would throw the industry on its head a little bit if they spent money on modern technologies to solve modern problems. So not to disagree with Sherry necessarily, just saying that Africa might need a different answer to face this new problem that we or to address this new problem we're facing today.
Vikas, last but not least,
Yeah.
tiebreaker. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on what Sherry has brought up and what Neil has brought up? Both, extremely important in what they've brought up. However, as an organization, if I'm sitting at home right now watching this last 90 minutes and I've gotten these two views, what would you say is the view that you give as advice to organizations?
So I think there's no like you can fit the old ways in the new way and new environment today. So I think one of the things that I've been saying, and I agree to what Neil just mentioned also and Shahid mentioned, I think very important aspect is like that we are trying to solve the old problems in a way which is and try to just disrupt our business model. So I think we need to be very cautious around. Uh, are we going to continue in doing the same thing the same way, or we need to do something differently? That's the first aspect. What I've been doing, and I've been trying to put myself in that role because acting as a virtual CISO officer for some of those organizations, I come up in a very big dilemma where some of the clients just say, we want to innovate. We want to move more toward the digitization and moving more in terms of customer centricity side of things. And at the same time, if you look at the legacy environment, it's something very obsolete. So how do you do those new innovative way of doing business with using this old stack of technology? So they need to evolve. At the same time, what we are seeing is like that CISOs or information security officers, whatever we call it, IT security functions, they need to also demonstrate that they are moved from the point of from value protections to value creation, which is very important aspect of looking at the business today. So and while you're doing as part of a risk, they typically say that, oh, the security function will not let us to really evolve. So they will be always be a showstopper. But what we are trying to say, we can still create some value out of what you want to achieve, the objective. But at the same time, you need to modernize the way of your working. So in the simple manners, what we are telling the client, it's a journey, which is not going to happen in the 2 months by buying two technology. Maybe this technology is not going to fit to your environment also. What you need to involve is basically involve your IT landscape in a way which is fit for tomorrow. At the same time, build your security defenses around it. So look in terms of if you are putting up the investment on security, have a right budgeting in terms of reset your cyber strategy. What is most important? What is more critical for you? Prepare in case of something goes wrong. How are you going to respond back to those incidents? And do you have enough capabilities? If not, whom you're going to rely on? Do you have some mechanism around, because technology is sitting on the different platforms, some mechanism to really integrate those and automations to really bring some early warning and detection mechanism? That's the only key way of looking at the risk today, because gone are those days where threats are the same, what we used to see. They are coming very fast paced and coming with a new way of really compromising the environment. Maddie.
I think Muddy might have gone for a beer. Oh no, it might be a bit early for a
I
beer.
just woke up. No, I'm joking. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all of you attending today. Just to sort of summarize and bring it to a soft landing, there's a quote that's very near and dear to my heart, which is business people need to understand the psychology of the risk versus the mathematics of those risks. I want to thank Sherry for your time. I'm sure we'll be seeing each other soon at our Canadian Women in Cybersecurity event in March. Neil, it's been a pleasure and an honor to have you in the last couple of hours hearing you speak and your views. And Vikas, it's been a pleasure as well. Thank you. I would also like to thank Gilbert and Jerry from the African Cyber Defense Forum for putting on an amazing day, or in our case, an amazing night. It's been fun. We've been able to connect and bridge a beautiful gap that had occurred for many, many years when it comes to cybersecurity in Canada and the rest of the world. To our viewers, thank you for being a part of our day. Make sure to tune in this week as we explore Middle East, Latin America, the Caribbean, and Asia. On behalf of CyberX and the team, again, thank you for your time, and you have yourself a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you, Madi. Thank you all. Thank you, Sherifat. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for
you.
sharing. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.